The following program is brought to you by the Baker & Baker Foundation and is a production of the Columbia Museum of Art.
Hi, and welcome to the More Than Rhythm podcast. I'm Dr. Birgitta Johnson, host and ethnomusicologist. Hello, and welcome back to Binder Podcast special episode celebrating the CMA's More Than Rhythm, a Black music series hosted by Dr. Birgitta Johnson. I'm Dr. Johnson, and I'm very excited about today's episode and the chance to speak to our guest artist, Nicole Neely. One of the areas or genres of music that I wanted to make sure we featured during the More Than Rhythm series was art music, better known as classical music. When we think about Black music in America, we often don't think about classical music, even though classical music is very much a part of American music culture by large. When we learn music in schools, often there's no mention of Black composers from Europe or the Americas in the curriculum, even though Black composers and performers have contributed to this art form for centuries now. So I wanted to make sure the series gave a platform not only to celebrate those contributions, but also to shine a light on the contemporary scene of Black musicians, arrangers, and composers who are contributing to art music, but also flexing their skills across genres. And who better an example of that today than Columbia, South Carolina native Nicole Neely? Arranger, composer, conductor, and Columbia, South Carolina native Nicole Neely joins us for a More Than Rhythm concert celebrating the impact and influence of Black composers and musicians in American classical music. Neely and her string quartet, The Black Exchange, will perform a range of pieces showcasing the diversity of today's art music scene. Based in Nashville, Tennessee, Neely has become a go-to arranger in the music scene, and her performing and arranging credits include a who's who of popular music. Artists such as her, John Legend, Beyonce, Mariah Carey, Alicia Keys, Willie Nelson, and country duo Florida Georgia Line. Neely also runs her own business, Strings Chick Music Company. Thank you for joining us, Nicole.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I'm excited about this, as I said before, and I remember just as I grew up playing Black church music and Black popular music, I was also exposed to classical music and played classical music from elementary school all the way up through high school and into college. And in addition to the standard European and white American composers that I was exposed to, we also played songs and pieces by William Grant Still and Margaret Bonds. In my school orchestras in Atlanta, we also played popular music, things that were on the radio. We almost sounded exactly like our marching band counterparts, who were kind of modeled after the HBCU bands, where they played funk and jazz and soul and rhythm and blues and gospel songs. And so when I got out into the world, I learned later in life that my experience with playing classical music and playing the violin was not exactly the same as people who did not grow up in the APS school system or the DeKalb County school system in Georgia. And so it was interesting to me to hear at my colleges, for example, at UCLA or at University of South Carolina, students say, well, I never learned about a Black composer. I didn't know anything about a William Grant Still until I got to a doctoral program. And so when I think about younger musicians and musicians around my age, I think about how we were introduced to classical music at this time period. So I wanted to know from you, what were some of your early memories of classical music as a distinct genre? And either some songs or some composers that might have pulled you into classical music.
Okay, so my background is a little interesting. Let me first start with that. So my father, I'm from a very musical family. And my father actually played piano and organ. He was a church organ, and he was also a minister. He played by ear, so he never knew how to read. My mother, she could read, but not well. You know, she took it as a youngster and kind of just didn't do as well. But the both of them really appreciated classical music. So by the time that me and my brother came along, from my understanding, they both said, our children are going to play classical music. They're going to be, in fact, my dad's words were, I want my children to be formally trained. Mm-hmm. So when we hear that, we know that means to go in and get a formal education, lessons in order to learn how to read music. So I'm a lot like you. Imagine being a child who was brought up playing, listening to classical. And we had records. So I'm 41. I don't look like it, but I definitely am 41. So we had records still, right?
Right.
And I remember my dad would play a cross between classical and then we had gospel, like the old James Cleveland.
Right. Mm-hmm.
You know, we had the Clark sisters. We had Timothy Wright. But then if you look over here, we had Ravel. One of my dad's favorite pieces, if not his favorite piece, is Bolero. And I remember him when CDs came in, my dad went and got the Bolero CD and would play that, you know. And so you would wake up on a Sunday and it wouldn't be, even though we were attending church, he'd be playing classical music. He was the big researcher in that. You didn't see a lot of fathers involved in that part, but my father in particular was very, very much a part of our our development altogether. But he asked a lot of questions and did a lot of research. And if anybody knows my father, knew him, they knew he was a very talkative, very social person and always was inquiring about our education, academic and extracurricular. And so he was the one that insisted on getting us into lessons at 5, me and my brother. We both started classical piano first. His thinking was, I want them to learn the entire span of the keyboard so that no matter what instrument, clef, register, they will be able to understand and, you know, translate and transcribe and transpose and all the things. And he nailed it. That's exactly what happened. I started violin at 6. So actually, I know it says violist, but I was a violinist up until my senior year.
That's what I wrote first. I wrote first violinist, and then I read back and said, oh, she's a violist, but I started violin at 8. So yes.
Yeah, I was a violinist at 6. I'll never forget. My brother started at 8 after me on viola. And we both just took it all the way up. Now, what's crazy is when he left the house, I switched over to viola because in my heart of hearts, I was not a violin player, even though I did very well in violin. I mean, I was in Allstate and I went to this summer camp and I did that and I was in first chair and principal and blah, blah, blah. But I just never, I think I knew, let me get on viola because it was very competitive to get into school. And I actually got into college on viola. So nobody knows this and don't tell anyone.
Okay.
But my freshman year of college, I was learning how to read alto, but I was in school. And so going back to my childhood, the original question was, what was the original question?
You got it. That's it. I think that particular path and that actual experience is very similar to what we've had with our previous guests in this case of the Black church being this nexus for education and your dad saying, I want them to be formally trained. And we see that across with our, previous guests like Mimi Jones, her dad saying, you're going to play the guitar first. I want you to learn the classical guitar first. And then she ends up being this wonderful bass player. But the kind of proficiency and the music proficiency coming from within the community and within the Black church is around, of course, you can play by ear. Of course, you can play gospel. You can play the hymns. But this idea of, I want you to formally be able to have a broader proficiency. And that, like you said, means going to take lessons. Also, that kind of welcoming of the oral tradition and the formal training means you have a great ear. So when you say I start learning viola clef in college, it's possible because you have this other competency that comes from that background that oftentimes people don't connect to the Black community or the Black church. But it's that extra type of skill you get because you can pivot a lot quicker.
Oh, absolutely. And let me just tell you, literally, we would be in church, singing in the choir and all the things on Sunday morning. And then I had orchestra Sunday afternoon. So as a kid, this is what is going on
right.
On a regular basis is, we're clapping and all that and shouting and all that and, in church. And then I go and I play Beethoven at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I
wanted to go back to, you mentioned your dad liking Ravel's Bolero. Any other composers that you kind of said, I like that one?
Dvorak. Anything by Dvorak. And you have to remember, the big thing for my parents was to expose us to the full orchestra as soon as we started.
Mm.
So we would go to ST Phil. We would go to South Carolina Phil. And I remember seeing Dr. Portnoy. Shout out to Donald Portnoy, Donnie P. Yep, that's it. And I remember saying at 7 that I was going to play for that man. So we were little. Like my parents would put dress shoes on us and I had white stockings and patent leather shoes.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
The uniform. That's the uniform. You're going somewhere today.
That's right. And we would go as a family to the orchestra and see it. And so I started to acquire this taste, this ear at a young age for classical music and could I better have sat still. And even if I, fell asleep on my dad or mom's shoulder, it was not because I was bored. It was just because I was a child and probably had a long day at school, but I appreciated, listening to that, to the full orchestra. And I remember Brooks Violin Concerto in G minor. That was a big one. We had a cassette tape, and I think that was first. And then I saw it perform, and that blew my mind. Dvorak Symphony, pick one. New World, of course, was like the thing. The procession of the nobles. I heard them play that the year that I was too young to be in All-State, and my brother's first year being in All-State, and that was one that they played. Anything by Beethoven, I love. Anything, because I felt like it was like borderline churchy.
Yes, yes.
We listened to a lot of Handel's Messiah, and let me pivot. You ready for this pivot?
Go ahead.
So when we listened to that was around the time that Quincy Jones, did his Handel's Messiah, and
A Soulful Celebration.
To this day, it boggles my mind how well he captured the original, but made it
all the genres. Exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I still got it on my iMusic right now. Every Christmas, I let it play. And that's been since I was like 8 or 9 or 10 or whenever it came out.
'Tis the season. I have it on cassette. It's time to bring it out. Because, that was one of those examples. I think Mervyn Warren did a lot of the production and arrangement on a lot of those songs. And so being able to have Handel's Messiah as we know it, but then, like you said, it sounded just like the Messiah, except for Al Jarreau is scatting on one song. Patty Austin is doing Who Shall Abide and this funky kind of backbeat thing, but she's hitting all the...
Listen, yes. It was just close enough to the real thing that you could take the book and you could go back and forth. So when I started playing the real Handel's Messiah as a violinist and a violist, I knew the words only because of Quincy Jones.
Same.
I could still sing that stuff.
Same.
Yeah.
Same.
Not because of the original. Yeah.
I actually played it in a professional orchestra years after I heard it on the Soulful Messiah. So when I was sight reading it in LA, I was like, oh, I know this because this basically is the slow version of what they did on the record. Or in some cases, because I was playing violin, so the melodic lines are almost exactly the same.
Yeah, he nailed it.
At that time, African-American churches, some of them were actually doing the actual Messiah. And so it wasn't a huge leap for them to have the gospel choir to do the Quincy Jones version because people were used to having sing-alongs in the community. So I think that embrace of classical music has always been there, generationally speaking. And a lot of times people don't know that. They see the gospel on the award shows, but the idea that the Black church is this place for multi-genre appreciation. When I was playing for the Southeast Symphony Orchestra, it was an all-Black orchestra. Some of our rehearsals for some of our concerts were in Black churches.
Okay.
That's how you could get the space that was big enough to hold a full symphony orchestra was sometimes to be in a Black church. And so oftentimes those people who were at the church were in our audiences. And so this embrace of the genre through organizations and musicians and all that, even the musicians' earlier experiences. Like I said, I played violin in a small country church in Marshallville, Georgia. And when it was time to play the doxology, the church pianist played, the part, and I played the lead parts. And so I played through the whole service, and people would come. I said, well, how did they get this violinist in this small church? It's like, my pastor said, you have to raise your musicians.
That's right. That's a whole nother conversation.
You have to raise them. So
you do. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't give my mom huge shout out. She always exposed us to musicals and operas. Okay. So I acquired also an ear for Broadway. And this is kind of off the subject, but my mother had us watch Fiddler on the Roof, right?
Uh-huh.
So in my 20s, I remember doing a Jewish wedding. And I had never done a Jewish wedding before. And that's a whole nother interesting story. But let's just say they were very shocked that the quartet and that was in Columbia, that the quartet was all Black. But I remember they wanted us to play a traditional Jewish song because of my mother. And I remember thinking, Fiddler on the Roof, what would that sound like? And we played it in the ceremony. The rabbi came over to us and said, that is the best I've ever heard a traditional Jewish song played by a non-Jewish group.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, how did you know that? And I told him, my mom just exposed me to everything, because also my mother was born and raised in Jersey City, New Jersey, and my dad in Brooklyn, New York. So they were raised around Jewish people. And so my parents grew an appreciation for all kinds of cultures,
right?
All of that stuff. And so the music came with it as well. And so because of that, my parents understood we don't have the luxury of always staying in our own box, because it doesn't necessarily pay the bills.
Right.
Or it doesn't give you the options that you need to really advance. And so that was why my parents insisted that we be formally trained so that we can have options in our career. And so because of that, their thing was, you need to learn it all. You need to learn how to play it all. And I know I'm getting into one of the questions. I'm going to leave that alone. But I'm just going to start by saying that my mother was huge in exposing us to all the genres and the art forms within, like theater, the music. So I knew how to approach all of that stuff. I can hear it. I can duplicate it. I get it. And so if I have to write an arrangement or a thing in that style, that genre, I know exactly where to recall from.
Hey, Wilson Boehm here with a ton of new More Than Rhythm programs coming this February. On Thursday, February 2nd, in celebration of Black History Month, enjoy a funk and soul listening party with DJ Lady Marauder, spinning the vinyl backdrop and heartbeat of the Black film renaissance of the 1960s and 70s. On Friday, February 3rd, low country soul musician Mahogany joins Dr. Birgitta Johnson for a conversation before taking the stage with a full band to perform reworkings of some familiar soul classics, as well as music, poetry, and images from her most recent album, Textures of a Southern Soul, A Gullah Geechee Soul, Volume 1. On Thursday, February 16th, join us for a screening of Soul to Soul. Recorded during the 1971 Soul to Soul concert in Accra, Ghana, this documentary features Wilson Pickett, the Staple Sisters, Ike and Tina Turner, and more, reconnecting with their personal roots, ancestral homeland, and history through music. And finally, on February 23rd, we will screen Claudine, 1974's romantic comedy starring Diane Carroll, James Earl Jones, and Lawrence Hilton Jacobs. A bittersweet, big-hearted celebration of family and community set to a sunny soul soundtrack composed by Curtis Mayfield and performed by Gladys Knight and the Pips. For more information about More Than Rhythm concerts, screenings, and programs, you can visit our website, www.columbiamuseum.org. And now, back to the show.
also, I want to make sure the audience knows, because we said it a little bit here, but I want to shout it out specifically, that you are a violist, but you also play several other string instruments, violin. I've seen you on Instagram playing cello at one point. I've seen you on the bass, and you also write and arrange music across the genres. As a string player who has this diverse background in music, how important was it for you to remain open in terms of genre? Because I know sometimes when we are trained classically, they tell you don't play anything else or don't play the other stuff, or you got to focus and perfect this particular format. How important was it to you to kind of maintain your proficiency, your hand, your ear on other genres of music? Well,
like we just said, we don't have the luxury of staying in the box. In order to be profitable, let's just talk about that. In order to make money, you kind of got to leave the four walls of us. And while I love us, this is not what is going on in the rest of the world and the rest of the music industry. And so you do have to be proficient at all of these genres. I mean, completely open. I've written arrangements for country music. I've written arrangements for plenty of pop, R&B, plenty of gospel. I have taken classical music and had to derive some arrangement, some sort of, I don't even know how to describe it, but to take the piano music and know where to put the voicings and to move things around. I helped with a full symphony orchestration of Lift Every Voice and Sing recently with a friend of mine, and had to know how to do all of that. And sometimes it blows my mind because I'm like, I just played for this hip hop artist yesterday, and now I have to play something classical. It's weird. It's not even so much the genres as much as it's the approach.
Right.
That's all it is. Because I will take the approach, I'll put a very classical approach in a gospel song and give it to my players. I don't have to say to them, hey, listen, I took this and I took this from Beethoven. They just know how to approach it because of the way that it is written.
Exactly.
And also because they can hear what the music is asking them to do. Even though it's in one genre, you can mix approaches. I'm very open to and make sure to keep myself versatile. I always say, people don't really know how to peg me because one day I'll do this over here, and then there's some other thing. I can't say what it is, but there's something else that's coming up that I'll be doing that is completely, it's in left field.
That's saying a lot for you, because I'm going to get into that in a second. But to that point about how in the classical music world that there's this kind of silo around what musicians can learn and play. And as an educator, I think about that because oftentimes that tradition of you can't play anything but classical is stunting, particularly to musicians and musicians of color who, like you said, you're expected to know more because there are going to be more opportunities across the board, because everyone can't be principal violin in an orchestra when orchestras are now becoming bankrupt, right?
That's right. That's right. I wasn't going to say it, but somebody had to.
Hey, that's what we hear. That is what we hear.
So let's go back to that. Recently, I had to do a class, or more like a master class. And I told the students, and I even talked to the dean and said, y'all really need to get into the heads of these students and find out what they really, really want to do. A lot of them do not want to be just classical musicians. And I went down the line and I asked them what they all wanted to do. A handful of them said classical orchestral playing. Most of them were like producing, writing songs. I asked them if there were other things they knew how to do: guitar, piano, sing, write songs. That opens up a whole nother market. And I think it does the kids a disservice because, just like you said, everyone cannot occupy the same seat. It's kind of like I think we have the same percentage as a football team.
Exactly.
Pro football team.
Right.
Or college. Like that percentage is real low. It may be lower because,
yes,
the truth be told, those tenure players are not trying to give up their seats.
No, they play until they literally sometimes pass. And then you think about the number of seats. How many flutes are in each orchestra?
Correct.
How many violins? How many violas is a very limited number. So our numbers probably are even smaller than professional sports. There is no D League for orchestra.
I think it's important for them to pull out as many of the talent and giftings and strengths of these kids coming up, so that they can monetize on everything. The pandemic absolutely showed that that needed to be a thing, because honestly,
right.
I'm gonna say what needs to be said. A lot of these orchestral players were stuck during the pandemic while the rest of us knew how to record. I mean, I was so busy during the pandemic recording from my house, you know, because I knew the technology and I accepted that that is the new way. It doesn't take from your gift. It doesn't take from your training. It doesn't take from the dignity of your upbringing. It just says that you can do more and survive. And you're digging in all of your, you know, your bag of tricks for everything, you know. And so I think it is just absolutely dangerous and unrealistic, to be quite honest. Also, you have a lot of these kids who are coming out of school with these degrees and don't get to where they want. And it does something to them internally when I'm not accepted into this grad school or into this orchestra. It really, girl, it.
Right. It's because I think about this when I talk to students and about, you know, they're thinking about their career path. I said, you have to do something that you love to do. But oftentimes in performance in particular, what we have been doing all these years and decades of practice and rehearsal, that's part of your identity. And so if you're not prepared to make sure your career supports that part of your identity, who you are as an artist, because you've been taught that this is the only way to do it, but then you don't get that way, but you're still an artist. Regardless of whether or not you get that first chair or that fifth chair at all, you're still an artist. And so how do you make sure that artist is okay, regardless of what happens on the job landscape? Are you prepared to make sure that artist can work anywhere and not those three places that someone thought and told you this is the way to be successful? Because even how we define success, once again, like you said, that pandemic changed that as far as musicians and live performers are concerned.
Some of it has not been revived since. The big thing, you know, they were figuring out in LA that they were doing charts from home for these big movies and sending them all in. You know, and so you mean we don't have to be in a room now? Of course, they've since gotten back into the room, but they got a lot done from remote recording. Big movies. Again, it just goes to show that it's not just about classical music, even though that is, I guess you could consider those scores to be, you know, 20th century classical, but still, it's not that traditional classical hall, you know, the classical composers that we know.
To piggyback to your experiences as this highly sought after female arranger in one of today's music industry capitals, Nashville. And I wanted to make sure we're clear. I want to say this for the people listening right now. She has played or written for everybody. Sometimes people say that, but we really mean it here in More Than Rhythm. She is basically played for artists from R&B, country, hip hop, gospel, names like Erykah Badu, Beyonce. I remember you played for Beyonce for the last Oscars. You've played for Florida Georgia Line, Willie Nelson, Lauren Hill, T.I., Eminem, did the score for Her's performance on the BET Awards, all the award shows. You've done all the award shows. And so when we talk about that type of activity, and then of course you moving to Nashville, when did you decide to go to Nashville, or what drove you to just go to Nashville at that point?
Let me fast forward this. So I moved in December of 2017 after a long stint of caregiving for my mother. She had a stroke in 2013. At the time, I was teaching in K through 12. So I was an orchestra teacher and had been kind of dibbling and dabbling in arrangements, but nothing serious. But I was starting to kind of not want to teach anymore and really get more into the industry writing. But I was like, no, I don't know. Maybe it's a risk. Maybe it's not. Then all of a sudden, my mother has a stroke. And at this point, my father had been deceased for some years. He passed away in 2007. And so it was just, you know, me taking care of my mother. Her health began to fail, which led me that following school year to get out of teaching because she needed me 24/7. And so the only thing that I had was these arrangements that I had already been struggling to want to get out of teaching to do. Well, guess what? God has a way of forcing you into this place. You asked for it. Now, I didn't ask for it to be that way.
Right.
But such is life. And I would not go back and erase any part of it. But I will say, after being in South Carolina for about 5 years and really struggling in every sense of the word, because I had to let go of every job that I had. And I packed my mom on my back in the car, and whatever we had left, I brought to Nashville and sold her house, and she was with me until we found out later on that year that my mother actually had lung cancer.
Oh, okay.
Never had smoked a day in her life. I don't think my mother even drank wine a day.
Wow.
She got sick and she declined until finally she passed away in 2019. But it was such a learning experience. It was a hard one. Woo. Everything you could have thought of happened in that 7 years. But that's why I moved to Nashville, because it just, as much as I loved Columbia, growing up there, you got to move on to facilitate your goals and your dreams. And that was just the move for me. I think it was 3 weeks after we got here, I just went in and started hiring these people I didn't know. Word around town was, there's this Black girl that's here hiring folks. Who is that?
Who is this? Who is this?
Because that doesn't happen. And I didn't know. I just knew.
Right.
I just changed locations and was doing what I've been doing. I mean, my world just began to open up. In fact, that year, Miss Lauren Hill became a client of mine.
Wow.
So,
wow.
Yeah, I wrote all of the string arrangements for her tour, for the Miss Education tour.
Wow.
And people tell me, they said that session, because I hired 17 players, they said that session got over to the schools, to the universities. And again, it was like, some Black girl is in town talking about she writing for people like Lauren Hill, and who that? And so.
Right.
Because of that, some of the well-known contractors and string players started to bring me on stuff. And I was asked to do some things for the Recording Academy. I was starting to be sought after, and I'm saying it now because now it all makes sense. But at the time, I was like, I just moved here. You just went and started doing what you know how to do. That's literally it. And I still do. To this day, that is my attitude. It's like, this is what I do. Once it's done, that's it. I move on. But I never realized how many people saw.
Right.
And it's obviously they saw more than just the music. It clearly, there's the breaking down of certain barriers. There's me being a Black female. I am almost positive that that's a question, that who is she and where does she come from? And how is she getting this stuff? Because it's not through us. And so when I make the statement that sometimes I'm doing this over here and then I'm doing this over here that has nothing to do with this, you can't trace me. And I thank God that there's that security that you can't trace me, because you're not supposed to be able to. And so while you're trying to figure this out over here and how I got this, that's finished. And somebody over here called me to do this. And you're like, wait. All I know is that I'm opening doors, that I'm a representation of all the things that people didn't think were possible. And I take this very, very seriously. I don't go into gigs with a singular attitude. I really do take all of us with us. Mm-hmm. Because I know if I screw up in a way, that there's a possibility that the perception would then be given to all of us. So I'm very careful. I don't lose myself, but I make sure that as many I's are as dotted as possible and as many T's are crossed as possible.
I always ask our artists and our guests about the role of collaboration, because we know that's a big part of African American music culture, collaborating community within musician communities. In your career as this multifaceted musician and arranger, I would like you to talk about some of the players that we're going to be seeing at the museum in a couple of weeks, the Black Exchange. Can you talk about some of the people you're collaborating with for our concert?
So Taylor Toots, she's a young violin player, very good. And that's all I can really say about her. She's in school right now. She's young, so I think she's developing in her career, and she's kind of like this quirky, artsy, very soft-spoken. Her voice sounds like she's 12. And that's another thing for me when I see someone, and if I can get my hooks in them to just bring them on, like I'm big on connection.
Right.
Big on connecting people and just figuring out who I can give a spot to, because I'm not going to be doing this forever. I don't want to do it forever, and it is not that deep for me. And I need to find people that can. And, you know, seeing the trajectory of their careers, this might be something that they need on their, you know,
the resume, or even this experience, you know, getting seen. Yeah, definitely.
She's great. And then Robin Massey, boy, what can I say? You'll see when you meet her. She is literally, she's a Peabody graduate, violist, but I'm putting her on violin for this gig.
Okay. Because we're versatile. Yes.
Yes. She's a literal angel, and I hope she hears this. She is one of the nicest human beings you will ever meet. Go figure, she is actually a neonatal nurse. So not only is she an amazing viola player, violinist, musician, but she takes care of babies, sick babies.
The little babies.
Yes, the sick ones. And she is absolutely great for it. But the way that she approaches music, when she plays, she brings you with her. I'm going to tell you now, you're going to stare at her most of the time. At this point, I'm like Robin here. You know, she's been able to do some things with me in gigs, and I love her energy. I love her leadership style. I love her encouragement. She feels, she's an empath, but in the best way possible. She feels what you feel, and it comes out in the music, even her movement and her sound. Her sound. She's the only person that I know that can make, it's like a very throaty, deep, hollow, clean, heavy sound. She can make out of that instrument. You'll hear it. She's great. Love you, Robin. And then there's Tremaine Booker, who is Mr. Cello Guy. That cello guy looking
on TikTok and Instagram.
Everything. What can I say about Tremaine? We are like brother and sister, and act like it. And he is an amazing player, an amazing producer, and arranger. Great ear. Fantastic ear. Knows his stuff. And a team player. We do a lot. Probably at this point, we do all our sessions together. And it has become a sound and a thing. And him being African American in Nashville, it's important for his legacy and his opportunity to break down barriers. You know, it's like we're kind of a team effort. You know, we definitely enjoy doing this together, and it's nice to look over and be like, you know what I'm talking about. Yep, you know, you know. There's a lot of that between me and him.
And so it sounds like, from even how you talk about legacy and connection and community and even collaboration, this is probably how you came up with Strings Chick Music Company, your business owner as well. So how you built this around this kind of idea, when I come in, I'm going to bring people with me. Is that kind of accurate, or?
That's my personality, but the Strings Chick, that actually came about way more shallow than...
You got to have something to call. You got to name it something.
People would literally be like, that chick does strings. And so one day I was like, then let's just move the sentence around and call me Strings Chick. I mean, for real. It was like, they didn't say that girl. They didn't say that. They were like, oh, the chick that does strings, you know, they never knew my name. And it worked. And people were like, literally, that is the most perfect name. And so when people see me in public, they're like, Strings Chick, you know?
Right.
And I'm like, go with it. Let's
go with it.
But I will say that I think it does something for little girls when they hear that. Because while, I know chick may be offensive to some, it's not that deep for me. But I think there's this that can resonate with, oh, like I can be that. Like, yeah, that's her brand name thing, but I can actually, that's a thing they can be too. It's not just for me to be the strings chick. It's your chick that does strings. Let's just call it that. That's become a play on words that people literally, that's how they would.
The streets named you. The streets named you.
That's it.
You said I turned it to a brand.
Yes.
When you really think about it, and if you really studied classical music, it's never really been about 3 or 4 European countries. Every time classical music went to another part of the world, the people in that culture, in that society, made their own version of it. There's a version of Mexican Baroque music because Spanish people in Mexico decided we're going to have our own version of this. And so African Americans have been doing that from our traditionally classical composers like Florence Price and Margaret Bonds and, William Grant Stills. We have the Richard Smallwoods. Total Praise, Anthem, Procession of the Levites, Center of My Joy. We're listening to Sunday music gospel with actual orchestral arrangements. The Hawkins family, they had strings. And so our approach as a culture to classical music and stringed instruments has been diversity. All the diversity and the decolonization that everyone else is trying to catch up to. We've had that in our communities for generations. And so that is why, I'm excited about our event. And I was excited about the concert. And of course, our listeners are going to hear little pieces of that in this particular episode. So thank you once again for joining us for the More Than Rhythm Binder podcast episodes. And I know you're in Baltimore recording in about a couple of minutes. So we're going to let you go. And thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.
The More Than Rhythm podcast is a production of the Columbia Museum of Art. Recording and editing by Drew Barron. Today's episode was hosted by Dr. Birgitta Johnson, and today's guest was Nicole Neely, whose string quartet, The Black Exchange, you heard throughout the episode. Additional production for this series is done by me, Wilson Boehm. Funding for this series is made possible by the Baker & Baker Foundation, and this program is supported by a Connected Communities grant from Central Carolina Community Foundation. This program has been made possible in part by the National Endowment for the Humanities. Democracy demands wisdom. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.
So, have a little bit of fun, and this will be it. This is it. This is it.